Hi everybody, welcome to my video series on Tiananmen Square. This is part 5 of the video series. If you'd like to watch any of the other videos, you can click on the playlist below. Something that I failed to mention, but I think is very important to understand, is the Sino-Soviet Summit of 1989, when Gorbachev of the USSR came and visited Deng Xiaoping in order to normalize relations between the two countries. Now, when Gorbachev came, the protests were still taking place, and so they needed to hold the welcoming party in the airport, which was very embarrassing for Deng Xiaoping and definitely did not help his perception of the protesters. But another interesting aspect that I think is important to be aware of is the way the protesters viewed Gorbachev, with many of the protesters holding up banners calling Gorbachev the ambassador of democracy. This next part of the video series is going to be very informal, mainly because I have a lot of thoughts, and also it's 4 o'clock in the morning, so I am exhausted. But most people know what happened June 4th, 1989. The PLA moved in on Tiananmen Square protesters and opened fire. But the violence really started June 3rd. That's when the first shots were fired. And people were not expecting live ammunition. They knew that this was going to happen. For example, there was an announcement on TV just earlier that morning on June 3rd telling people that they needed to stay indoors. So people knew that the move was going to happen, but people were not expecting to be shot with live ammunition out the gate. Another thing that I think is important to note are the radical groups we talked about in the last part. So these groups, they became anti-government groups, and they directly fought with PLA. There was one instance where they torched like 100 trucks and armored vehicles. There was another situation where a soldier was beaten to death and then his body was hung from a tree. Very violent and aggressive. Eventually, though, even the radical groups came to the realization that they were going up against tanks with sticks. And the leaders of the radical groups, they confiscated the weapons that the protesters had and agreed to handle everything through peaceful means. There was an instance where a tank drove through a crowd, killing 11 people. There was another situation where a crowd tried to get back into the square and troops surrounding it opened fire, shooting many of them in the back. There were even some reports that later on during the night, there were clashes between units of the PLA. There are theories, there are possibilities, there are questions, and there's not a lot of answers. I will be honest with y'all, it was very frustrating researching this. People probably want me to concentrate more on what happened June 3rd, 4th, and 5th, but I wanted to concentrate more on the motivations of the protesters because I think that's what's manipulated the most by the media, whether it be in China or in the West. I think the protesters are disrespected by both sides. One pretends like they never existed, and the other uses them as a gotcha moment.